In 1992, a paper appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine that quietly unsettled everything nutritionists thought they knew about where omega-3 comes from. A researcher named Artemis Simopoulos had spent years studying rural Greek islanders, people with remarkably low rates of heart disease, strong cardiovascular markers, and inflammation levels that puzzled her colleagues. The assumption was fish, the Mediterranean diet, the seafood, but when she looked closer, these particular islanders were not eating much fish at all. She traced the source. It was a weed, a low-growing, fleshy-leaved plant they tossed into salads and stews without ceremony. The same plant most American gardeners spend their summers pulling out by the handful and throwing in the compost. Here is the uncomfortable question that paper raised, and that no one in the wellness industry has adequately answered since. How many times have you thrown away something your body was actually asking for? Today, we are looking at 13 plants weeds, most of them growing in your lawn, your garden beds, the cracks in your sidewalk, the field at the end of your street. Right now, plants that contain meaningful amounts of omega-3, plants that traditional cultures ate deliberately for centuries, plants that modern gardeners remove on site. One honest note before we begin. The omega-3 inches plants is primarily ALA, alpha-linolenic acid. Your body uses it directly and converts a portion of it to the longer chain forms found in fish. Though that conversion rate is modest, think of these plants as a valuable and largely ignored part of your omega-3 picture. Not a replacement for anything your doctor has recommended. Pay close attention to number 1. It is the plant Simopoulos was actually writing about. Most people have it in their garden right now and have spent years removing it. And stay with us through number 7, because what happened to that plant in 1519 is one of the most consequential acts of nutritional destruction in recorded history. A civilization was dismantled, in part, by burning a weed. Number 13. Cleavers. You know this plant by touch before you know it by name. The sticky, sprawling spring plant, whose small burrs attach to everything that passes your jacket sleeve. Your dog's fur? Your garden gloves. You have pulled cleavers off your clothing every spring walk for your entire life. That relationship is older than agriculture. Cleavers has been reproducing by hitchhiking on humans for thousands of years. It was traveling with our ancestors before we had gardens to put it in. Most European languages have a word for it, and most of those words reference its sticking habit. The plant has been making itself known to us across the full span of recorded human history. Medieval European herbalists valued cleavers specifically for lymphatic support, the movement and drainage of lymphatic fluid that plays a central role in immune surveillance and the clearance of metabolic waste from tissue. This was not vague folk intuition. The herbalists of the 12th and 13th centuries were careful empirical observers, and they returned to cleavers consistently across generations. For the same application, Hildegard Bing, the 12th century abbess, whose medical writings have earned serious scholarly attention in recent decades, documented cleavers alongside a rationale for its use that aligns remarkably well with what researchers now understand about lymphatic function. After 60, lymphatic function can become sluggish. The result: slow recovery from infection, tissue fluid retention. Persistent low-grade fatigue are common complaints in that age group, and almost never attributed to their actual cause. Cleavers contains ALA, alongside iridoids and flavonoids, that researchers have studied for diuretic and lymphagogue properties, compounds that support fluid movement through tissue. A 2010 study, published in the Journal of Complementary and Integrative Medicine, confirmed meaningful antimicrobial activity in cleavers extract against both bacterial and fungal strains. That finding is consistent with its traditional use for infections and wound care across multiple European herbal traditions. What is rarely mentioned is that the diuretic compounds in cleavers operate through a different mechanism than pharmaceutical diuretics. Rather than forcing fluid excretion through kidney pressure, the traditional preparation supports the lymphatic vessels themselves, the thin-walled channels that run alongside blood vessels and drain fluid from tissue spaces. These are the channels that become sluggish with age and with sedentary living, and that no pharmaceutical currently addresses with the same mechanism. The traditional preparation is cold infusion. Young stems and leaves placed in a jar of cold filtered water and left overnight 8 hours minimum rather than steeped hot. This is not arbitrary. The active iridoid compounds in cleavers are heat sensitive. Boiling water degrades them significantly. The cold water extraction that traditional communities used, without knowing why it worked better, is now understood to be the method most consistent with preserving the compounds that give the plant its documented activity. The season is short. Early spring, before the plant becomes woody and the burrs develop fully. Harvest then. The flavor is fresh, mildly vegetal, entirely neutral, easier to drink than most herbal preparations. The plant that has been attaching itself to your clothing every spring walk was not being a nuisance. It was making itself known. Number 12. Wild violet. Wild violets appear in lawns every spring. Low heart-shaped leaves. Small, purple or white flowers that most people consider decorative before mowing over them without a second thought. They have been eaten continuously across Europe, Asia, and North America for centuries. The flowers were candied by Victorian confectioners and appeared on formal dessert tables. The leaves were added to salads and soups across medieval Europe. Native American communities across multiple tribal traditions independently used both the leaves and flowers as food and medicine, with documented consistency that researchers have found striking in its cross-cultural convergence. That convergence matters. When cultures with no contact reach identical conclusions about a plant, they are not sharing mythology. They are reporting observation. Wild violet leaves contain ALA, alongside one of the highest vitamin C concentrations of any wild green available in temperate climates, gram for gram. Significantly more vitamin C than oranges. That combination is nutritionally relevant for a specific reason that most wellness content overlooks entirely. Both omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin C support vascular endothelial function, the health of the cell lining inside blood vessels, but through entirely separate mechanisms. Omega-3 works through eicosanoid pathways, reducing the inflammatory signaling that damages vessel walls. Vitamin C works as a cofactor in collagen synthesis, maintaining the structural integrity of those same walls. 2 compounds, 2 pathways, 1 leaf. For anyone over 60 managing cardiovascular health, a plant that addresses both pathways simultaneously and requires nothing from you except the decision to stop mowing it is not a minor footnote. The flowers are an accessible entry point. Mild and floral, visually striking on salads and desserts, recognizable enough that eating them does not feel like a leap. Start with the flowers, then move to the leaves. Young spring leaves raw in salads have a mild, slightly vegetal flavor that most people find entirely approachable. Added to soups and stews in the final minutes of cooking, they contribute nutrition without altering the dish in any way you would notice. The plant returns every spring without any effort from you. No cultivation. No planting. No maintenance. Only the decision to recognize it as food rather than lawn competition. Number 11. Dandelion. You already know the dandelion. You have spent money trying to remove it. The omega-3 content of dandelion leaves is modest compared to most other plants on this list. That is not why it belongs here. Dandelion belongs here because of what it does to the omega-3 you consume from every other source. The inulin in dandelion root, a specific type of prebiotic fiber that survives digestion intact, selectively feeds bifidobacterium and lactobacillus in the gut. These are the beneficial bacterial populations responsible for producing the short-chain fatty acids that regulate intestinal inflammation and maintain the gut lining through which all nutrients, including omega-3 fatty acids, are absorbed. When the gut lining is inflamed and beneficial bacterial populations are depleted, omega-3 absorption becomes less efficient regardless of how much you consume. You can eat the most omega-3 rich diet available and absorb a fraction of it if the gut is not prepared to receive it. After 60, gut microbiome diversity declines measurably. Bifidobacterium populations in particular drop with age, and their absence correlates with increased intestinal permeability, the condition sometimes called leaky gut, which further compromises nutrient absorption and amplifies systemic inflammation. Dandelion root addresses this at the source. What is almost never mentioned in discussions of dandelion is its effect on bile production. The bitter compounds in dandelion leaves sesquiterpene lactones specifically stimulate bile secretion before meals. Bile is required for the emulsification and absorption of all fat-soluble nutrients, omega-3 included. Every traditional food culture that consumed bitter greens before meals was, without knowing it, optimizing fat absorption for everything that followed. The French aperitif tradition, the Italian pre-dinner bitter digestivo, the Middle Eastern practice of eating bitter herbs at the Passover Seder, commanded in Exodus 12, and observed continuously for over 3,000 years. The mechanism behind these traditions is now understood. The bitter compounds come first, because bile must be ready before fat arrives. Dandelion is best as a two-part preparation. Young spring leaves mildest before the plant flowers eaten raw in salads to deliver the bitter compounds that stimulate bile. Dandelion root tea in the morning, dried roots simmered for 10 minutes. Strained. Drunk before the first meal. The prebiotic effect on gut bacteria accumulates over days and weeks. It is not immediate, but it is real and measurable in microbiome research. Harvest only from unsprayed ground. That requirement matters more with dandelion than almost anything else on this list, because dandelion roots are extraordinarily efficient at absorbing soil compounds, nutrients, and contaminants alike. The plant you have been paying to remove has been performing two functions in your nutritional ecosystem simultaneously. It was waiting for you to notice. Number 10. Mallow. Mallow is the plant that kept people alive during documented famines. Not metaphorically. In the historical record, the Book of Job, written in what scholars estimate to be the 6th to 4th century BCE, contains a passage in chapter 30 that describes people in such desperate poverty they forage mallow from the bushes and root bark from juniper trees. It is not presented as adequate food. It is presented as survival, the absolute floor of human subsistence, and yet mallow sustained people through that floor, through the siege of Jerusalem, through multiple European food failures in the medieval period, through the Irish famine of the 1840s, when it was eaten by populations who had lost access to everything else and needed something, anything, that would grow through neglect and poor soil. Mallow grows when nothing else will. Through drought, through compaction, through soil so depleted that cultivated plants fail entirely. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder documented it in the 1st century CE and noted that it grew readily in conditions that defeated other plants. In the Mediterranean, it is still eaten as an ordinary vegetable without ceremony. In most of the rest of the world, it grows in neglected corners and gets pulled up without recognition. Mallow contains ALA, alongside mucilaginous polysaccharides, long-chain sugar molecules that form a gel-like coating when they contact moisture. That coating is what makes mallow feel slightly slippery when you chew it. And that coating, traveling through the digestive tract, coats and soothes inflamed mucous membranes throughout the gut lining. For people over 60 dealing with digestive inflammation, which becomes increasingly common as the gut lining naturally thins with age, mallow addresses the omega-3 deficit and gut inflammation simultaneously through separate but complementary mechanisms. The mucilaginous compounds in mallow are water-soluble and survive moderate heat, a 10-minute steep in warm water, not boiling. Warm extracts them effectively. Traditional communities use dried mallow leaves, steeped this way for both digestive complaints and respiratory inflammation. The mucilaginous compounds coating and soothing inflamed throat tissue in the same way they soothe the gut lining. The plant's application was consistent across the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and East Asia, 3 cultures with no common medical tradition reaching the same preparation for the same conditions. The seed pods, called cheeses for their round shape, are edible, raw, and have a mild, pleasant flavor. The young leaves added to soups in the final minutes of cooking retain their soothing properties when not overcooked. The plant in the neglected corner of your garden is not a problem. It is a resource that populations in genuine crisis relied on for survival. Number 9. Stinging nettle. You already know this plant. It introduces itself memorably. The sting disappears entirely, with 60 seconds of blanching. What remains is one of the most nutritionally complete wild greens available anywhere in the temperate world. Nettle's ALA content is modest compared to purslane or lamb's quarters. That is not the reason it belongs near the top of this list. Nettle's omega-3 arrives packaged alongside iron, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and vitamin K in concentrations that exceed most cultivated greens. And the mineral context matters more than most people realize. Omega-3 fatty acids require specific cofactors to be metabolized, efficiently magnesium and zinc in particular. Nettle provides both. Eating a food that contains omega-3 alongside the minerals required to process it is fundamentally different from eating omega-3 alone. Traditional populations who ate nettle regularly were not getting one nutrient. They were getting a complete nutritional package that the body recognized as a whole food. There is a detail about nettle that almost no modern wellness source mentions. The blanching water, the water you use to neutralize the sting in 60 seconds of boiling, is a concentrated mineral broth. Every mineral that leaches from the leaves during blanching is now in that water. Most people discard it. Traditional communities did not. They saved it for soups, for cooking grains, for drinking directly. That water contains a mineral profile that rivals commercial mineral supplements. Pouring it down the drain is the nutritional equivalent of throwing away the most valuable part of the plant. Roman soldiers rubbed fresh nettles on their legs before long marches through the cold provinces of Britain to stimulate circulation through the skin's inflammatory response. They understood something about this plant that modern research has since confirmed, that the formic acid and histamine compounds responsible for the sting also stimulate local blood flow and nerve activity in ways that produce genuine physiological effects. The soldiers were not superstitious. They were empirical. They knew what worked, and they used it without needing to know why. For anyone over 60, the combination of omega-3, iron, magnesium, and vitamin K in a single plant addresses several of the most common nutritional gaps in that age group simultaneously. Iron deficiency is frequently overlooked as a contributor to fatigue in older adults. Magnesium deficiency affects an estimated 45% of Americans and is almost never tested for. Vitamin K is essential for both bone density and the prevention of arterial calcification, two of the most consequential health concerns after 60. Wear gloves to harvest the young spring growth, the top 4 to 6 inches. Before flowering, blanch for 60 seconds. Use exactly as you would cook spinach. Save the blanching water. The sting is not a reason to avoid this plant. It is simply the price of admission. Number 8. Shepherd's purse. Shepherd's purse is named for its seed pods. Small, flat, heart-shaped, hanging in rows along the stem. They resemble the leather purses that European shepherds carried in the medieval period. Once you know what to look for, those pods are unmistakable. This plant has been in continuous documented medical use for longer than almost anything else on this list. Egyptian medical papyri reference it. Dioscorides documented it in the 1st century CE in his De Materia Medica. The pharmacological text that remained the standard reference in both European and Islamic medicine for over 1,500 years. Traditional Chinese medicine used it for over 2,000 years, specifically for conditions involving blood and fluid regulation. It was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia as recently as 1947, officially recognized as medicine within living memory, before being quietly removed when pharmaceutical alternatives became commercially available. That removal date matters. Shepherd's purse did not stop working in 1947. The decision to remove it from the pharmacopoeia was commercial, not scientific. The plant's documented activity did not change. The economic incentive to acknowledge it did. The flavonoid rutin found in meaningful concentrations in shepherd's purse has been studied extensively for its effects on blood vessel, permeability, and capillary fragility. Rutin supports the structural integrity of small blood vessels and has been shown in clinical research to reduce capillary leakage and bruising. For people over 60 who notice they bruise more easily than they used to, capillary fragility is the mechanism, and rutin is one of the few compounds with good research support for addressing it. Shepherd's purse also contains fumaric acid, an organic acid involved in the citric acid cycle, the cellular energy pathway, at concentrations high enough to be physiologically relevant. The plant is unusual in that it was used medicinally in cultures that had no contact with each other. Across Europe, East Asia, and the Middle East, for overlapping conditions. That convergence is not coincidence. It is observation accumulating across centuries. Young leaves before the plant flowers, eaten raw in salads, have a mildly peppery flavor similar to watercress. The seed pods carry a slightly spicy, mustard-like quality. The plant belongs to the same botanical family as mustard and cabbage. And the flavor relationship is recognizable. It grows year-round in mild climates, and returns reliably each season without any assistance from you. If this kind of ancient knowledge resonates with you, the idea that our ancestors knew things we are only now beginning to document scientifically, hit like and subscribe, because what's coming next goes even deeper. Number 7. Wild amaranth. In 1519, Spanish conquistadors arriving in Mexico made a decision that historians now consider one of the most consequential acts of nutritional destruction in recorded history. They banned amaranth. The plant was so central to Aztec civilization as food, as medicina. As the ceremonial foundation of rituals, the Spanish wanted to eliminate that cultivating it was made a capital offense. Entire fields were burnt. Seed stocks were confiscated. Farmers caught growing. It faced execution. A crop that had fed one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the Americas for thousands of years, that had sustained a population of millions through the demands of a complex urban society, was reclassified as forbidden by colonial decree. What the conquistadors understood, and what they feared, was that amaranth was not incidental to Aztec civilization. It was foundational. The tamales made from amaranth flour fed armies. The seeds provided protein and essential fats to a population with limited access to animal sources. The plant grown in courtyard gardens was as close to a dietary cornerstone as any single food could be. Destroying it was a strategy for destroying the people. It survived anyway. Wild amaranth, a weedy, vigorous relative of the cultivated grain, spread across disturbed soil throughout North and South America and never stopped growing. It grows in your garden right now, almost certainly as a weed you pull without knowing what it is. Wild amaranth leaves contain meaningful ALA, alongside a protein profile that exceeds most cultivated greens, including all 9 essential amino acids, making it one of the only plants with complete protein in its leaves, rather than just its seeds. The squalene content in amaranth, a compound also found in shark liver oil and olive oil that has been studied for its antioxidant and immune-modulating properties, is significantly higher in wild amaranth than in the cultivated grain, varieties that modern health food stores sell. The combination of complete protein, Omega-3, and squalene in a single weed is genuinely unusual. For people over 60 dealing with muscle maintenance, which becomes increasingly critical after 60, as muscle mass naturally declines at a rate of approximately 1 to 2% per year, the protein profile of wild amaranth addresses a concern that omega-3 alone does not. The civilization the Spanish tried to destroy, by eliminating this plant, understood something that took nutritional science centuries to catch up to. Young leaves under 6 inches tall can be eaten raw in salads or cooked like spinach. The flavor is mild, slightly earthy, significantly more approachable than many wild greens. If you allow one plant to go to seed in late summer, the seeds can be harvested and used as a grain, nutty, slightly sweet. Nutritionally, exceptional. Most people pull the plant before it gets that far. Consider leaving one. Number 6. Wood sorrel. Wood sorrel looks like clover. It grows where clover grows in lawns, along garden paths, In the gaps between paving stones, if you have ever weeded a lawn, you have pulled it out by the handful. And if you have ever chewed a leaf without knowing why, you already know its defining characteristic. It tastes sharply, cleanly of lemon. That tartness is oxalic acid in organic form, the same compound that gives rhubarb its flavor. And it is the reason wood sorrel was used as a souring agent in cooking across Europe and North America for centuries before lemons became widely available in northern markets. Medieval European cooks used it to make green sauces for fish and poultry. Native American communities ate it fresh and dried it for winter provisions. French chefs still use the cultivated version Rumex acetosa in fine cooking. The wild version growing in your lawn is nutritionally identical and entirely free. What is almost never mentioned about wood sorrel is its historical use as an anti-scurvy plant in northern European populations. Before citrus became accessible to ordinary people in northern climates, populations in Britain and Scandinavia and northern France faced vitamin C deficiency through the long winters with regularity. Wood sorrel, with its exceptional vitamin C concentration significantly higher per gram than oranges, was gathered and dried specifically to address this. Sailors on long voyages, before the widespread adoption of lime juice, carried dried sorrel for the same purpose. The plant's role in preventing scurvy in pre-citrus northern Europe is documented and largely forgotten. The combination of omega-3 and vitamin C in wood sorrel is nutritionally interesting, for the same reason it is in wild violet. Both compounds support vascular endothelial health through separate mechanisms, but wood sorrel adds a third dimension, quercetin, a flavonoid found in the leaves in concentrations that have been studied for anti-inflammatory and antihistamine activity. The traditional use of wood sorrel for spring hay fever symptoms, documented across European folk traditions, independently has a plausible biochemical explanation in that quercetin content. The plant that arrives in spring when pollen does was, in some traditions, used specifically for the symptoms pollen causes, whether that connection is coincidence or ecology. The quercetin research gives it scientific standing that most allergen supplements currently on the market cannot match for bioavailability. A small handful of fresh leaves squeezed over fish, stirred into salad dressings, or added to herb butters, the flavor is strong enough that it functions as a seasoning rather than a bulk green. It is in your lawn. Taste one leaf the next time you pull a handful. Number 5. Chickweed. Chickweed has a timing advantage that no other plant on this list can claim. It grows in winter. While everything else in the garden is dormant, and the ground is bare, and the grocery store is offering the same shrink-wrapped lettuce from a facility 1,500 miles away. Chickweed pushes through cold soil and covers garden beds in a dense, delicate mat of green from late autumn through early spring. It arrives precisely at the nutritional gap when fresh greens are most scarce, when the body is most depleted after months of stored and preserved food, when immune vulnerability is at its seasonal peak. Traditional populations in temperate climates understood this timing as medicine in itself. The plant that appears when nothing else will grow, carrying nutrients that winter diets consistently lacked, was not dismissed as a weed. It was harvested with the same deliberateness that modern people apply to health supplements. What is rarely discussed about chickweed is its historic use in European monastic gardens. Monasteries maintained physic gardens, medicinal plant gardens, with careful documentation of each plant's properties and uses. Chickweed appears in monastic records across Britain, Germany, and France, specifically for winter harvest and for preparations addressing the skin inflammation and respiratory irritation that were common in populations living in damp, cold stone buildings through long winters. The monastic herbalists were not romantic about weeds. They were systematic. If chickweed appears consistently in their records, it was because consistent observation confirmed its value. Chickweed contains ALA alongside vitamin C, B vitamins, calcium, and magnesium, the precise combination of nutrients that winter diets in temperate climates were historically most deficient in. Recent laboratory research has identified anti-inflammatory flavonoids in chickweed extract, consistent with its long traditional use for skin inflammation. The concentration of these compounds is highest in the actively growing tips, the tender, bright green growth at the ends of the stems, not the older, slightly stringy stem tissue. The plant responds to harvesting by branching more vigorously. Cutting it encourages more growth rather than depleting it. Your winter garden is producing food right now and generating more of it each time you harvest. Most people are not collecting it. Raw in winter salads. Blended into smoothies where the delicate flavor disappears. Added to soups in the final minute. Chickweed requires nothing from you except the decision to recognize the winter green that has always been there. Number 4. Fat hen. Fat hen has one of the least inspiring names in the plant world. It got it because farmers noticed their hens grew fat and healthy when they had access to it. An observation that, in hindsight, should have told the farmers something about what they themselves were missing when they stopped eating it. This plant, Chenopodium album, also called goosefoot, for the shape of its leaves is the direct wild ancestor of both spinach and quinoa. It predates both cultivated descendants by thousands of years. Archaeological evidence of fat hen consumption in human settlements across Europe and Asia goes back over 8,000 years. Seeds have been found in the stomach contents of bog bodies, Iron Age people preserved in peat bogs across northern Europe, confirming that it was a regular food. Nota famine crop. These were well-nourished people eating fat hen as an ordinary part of their diet. What the cultivation of spinach cost us, nutritionally, was measurable. Fat hen contains more ALA than spinach per gram, alongside iron at concentrations that rival meat sources and calcium that exceeds dairy by weight. The cultivated descendants were selected for palatability, uniformity, and yield, not for nutritional density. The wild ancestor that those cultivated plants came from is still growing in your vegetable bed, almost certainly between your other plants right now, and it is nutritionally superior to the plants you are tending. There is a specific detail about fat hen that nutritional research has noted and that rarely reaches popular health media. The saponins in fat hen mild, soap-like compounds in the leaves have a prebiotic effect in the gut that is distinct from the inulin-based prebiotics in dandelion. They selectively support different bacterial populations, which means eating fat hen alongside dandelion creates a broader prebiotic effect than either plant alone. Traditional diets that included a diversity of foraged greens were not just getting nutritional variety, they were cultivating microbial diversity in the gut through the diverse prebiotic compounds in different wild plants. Modern supplementation with a single prebiotic strain is a pale approximation of what a varied wild green diet accomplished automatically. Cooked like spinach, sautéed briefly in olive oil, added to soups, stirred into eggs. The flavor is mild, slightly mineral, entirely approachable. Young leaves can be eaten raw in small amounts. The irony of pulling out a plant more nutritious than what you are cultivating is not small. Number 3. Lamb's quarters. Most people have never heard of lamb's quarters. The ones who have know it as a weed, a fast-growing, pale green plant with diamond-shaped leaves dusted in a white powdery coating that makes them look slightly frosted even in midsummer heat. What most people do not know is that lamb's quarters was a staple food crop in North America for thousands of years before European contact. Indigenous communities across the continent harvested it deliberately. The seeds were ground into flour. The leaves were eaten as a primary green throughout the growing season. Archaeological evidence places lamb's quarters consumption in human settlements going back at least 5,000 years. It was not a backup food. It was a cornerstone food. Then European settlers arrived, introduced cultivated greens, and lamb's quarters was reclassified from food to weed within a generation. Not because it became less nutritious, because it became unfamiliar. The cultural decision to stop eating it was made in less than a century. The nutritional cost of that decision has been accumulating ever since. Lamb's quarters contains more omega-3 per gram than spinach, more calcium than milk by weight, and more protein than most cultivated leafy greens available in any grocery store. The white powder on the leaves is not disease or damage. It is a natural coating of calcium oxalate crystals that the plant produces as a byproduct of mineral uptake from the soil. It is edible, tasteless, and a visible indicator of the plant's exceptional mineral density. There is a preparation detail about lamb's quarters that almost no modern source addresses. The seeds small, black, and produced in large quantities in late summer, contain saponins that mildly inhibit nutrient absorption when eaten raw in large amounts. Brief soaking or light toasting eliminates this. Indigenous communities that ground lamb's quarters seeds into flour typically either soaked or heat processed the seeds before use. That processing step was not arbitrary. It was refined practice that removed the one compound in an otherwise exceptional food that reduced its value. Traditional food preparation knowledge included not just what to eat, but how to prepare it, so the body could fully receive what it offered. Young leaves eaten raw in salads have a mild flavor similar to spinach but slightly earthier. Larger leaves cooked briefly in olive oil with garlic. The plant is growing in disturbed soil within walking distance of almost every home in America right now. The decision to stop eating it was cultural, not nutritional. It can be unmade. Number 2. Stinging nettle's hidden relative Galansoga chickweed, which is precisely why it belongs near the top of this one. Galansoga parviflora, known as gallant soldier, chickweed, or potato weed, arrived in Europe from South America in the late 18th century, escaped from a botanical garden at Kew in the 1860s, and has been spreading through garden beds, allotments, and disturbed urban soil ever since. It is one of the fastest-growing annual weeds in temperate gardens, capable of completing its full life cycle seed to seed in as few as 6 weeks. In warm conditions, it produces 3 to 4 generations per growing season. Gardeners despise it. The Andean communities in Peru and Bolivia, from which this plant originates, did not despise it. They ate it. Guasca the Quechua, name for Galansoga, is a named ingredient in ajiaco, the Colombian national soup. It is not optional in that recipe. It is the defining herb. The mucilaginous compounds in Galansoga leaves produce the characteristic thick, silky texture of a giaco that no substitute fully replicates. A food plant that emigrated from South America, escaped captivity in London, spread across Europe and North America, and is now the most aggressively removed annual weed in home vegetable gardens on 3 continents, while simultaneously remaining a named, non-optional ingredient in a national dish, is not a coincidence of botany. It is a plant that genuinely works in food. Galansoga contains ALA alongside caffeic acid derivatives, phenolic compounds with well-documented anti-inflammatory activity that have been studied for their effects on oxidative stress in aging tissue. The flavonoid profile includes quercetin and luteolin, both of which appear consistently in research on anti-inflammatory compounds in plant foods. For people over 60, dealing with the chronic low-grade inflammation that accumulates in joints and vascular tissue with age, a plant with multiple anti-inflammatory mechanisms in a single leaf is worth knowing about. The preparation used in Colombian cooking is instructive. Fresh Galansoga leaves added to the pot in the final minutes of cooking, not at the beginning. Not simmered for hours. The practice of adding it late is not arbitrary. The caffeic acid compounds in Galansoga are heat-sensitive above a certain threshold. Long cooking degrades them. The traditional practice of adding the leaves at the end, which cooks preserved through observation, without the chemistry to explain it, is now understood to be the method that preserves the active compounds. Fresh leaves added in the final 2 minutes of soup or stew. Raw leaves in small quantities in salads. The flavor is mild and slightly resinous, pleasant in combination with stronger flavored greens. The weed you are pulling from between your tomatoes was, in another country, a named ingredient in a national recipe. That fact alone is worth sitting with for a moment. Number 1. Purslane. This is the one Simopoulos was writing about. Purslane is a low, sprawling succulent with thick, fleshy leaves, reddish stems, and a slightly lemony taste that makes it genuinely pleasant to eat raw. It grows in garden beds, in pavement cracks, between vegetable rows. In any patch of disturbed warm soil, it can find It thrives in heat. It tolerates drought. It grows in soil so poor that other plants fail, and most gardeners pull it out on site. The 1992 paper in the New England Journal of Medicine identified purslane as the key dietary variable, explaining why those Greek islanders had omega-3 levels comparable to regular fish eaters. They were eating purslane regularly, casually, as an ordinary part of meals, not as a health food, not with any awareness that they were doing something exceptional, just as food that had always been there. The numbers are striking. Purslane contains 300 to 400 milligrams of ALA per 100 grams of fresh leaves, the highest omega-3 content of any leafy vegetable ever measured. That is approximately 5 times more than spinach. More remarkably, purslane is one of the only land plants on Earth that contains trace amounts of EPA and DHA, the long-chain marine omega-3s that are otherwise found almost exclusively in fish and algae. No other common garden weed can make that claim. When researchers ask how a plant growing in hot, dry Mediterranean soil ended up producing the same omega-3 compounds normally found in cold water marine organisms, the answer takes us to a biological mechanism most people have never considered. Purslane produces EPA and DHA as a response to heat and water stress. Under hot, dry conditions, the plant cell membranes require more fluid omega-3 fatty acids to maintain flexibility and function. The plant synthesizes them internally, the very conditions that make purslane a relentless garden weed: heat tolerance, drought tolerance. The ability to thrive in disturbed poor soil are the same conditions that drive the production of the omega-3 compounds that make it exceptional as food. The weediness and the nutrition are products of the same biological response. Now close your eyes for a moment and hold this scene. It is the desert of Paran, south of Beersheba. The sun is at its height. A woman named Hagar, cast out of the household of Abraham, carrying her young son, Ishmael, has walked to the point of exhaustion. She has placed the child under a bush because she cannot carry him further. She has moved away from him because she cannot watch him die. The water is gone. The food is gone. In Genesis 21, the text says simply that she lifted her voice and wept. Then a voice. Then a well she had not seen, appearing as if it had always been there. She fills the vessel. The boy drinks. What grew at the edge of that desert? Well, what covered the disturbed soil around the water source in that landscape? Heat-stressed, sun-scorched, growing in exactly the conditions that produce the highest EPA and DHA concentration in any land plant: purslane. That is not interpretation. That is botany meeting geography, meeting a story 4,000 years old. The omega-3 source, growing at the margin between survival and death, in the soil conditions that maximize its nutritional potency. The angel did not need to explain the biochemistry. The plant had always been there. The anti-inflammatory compounds in purslane, including betaceanins, the red pigments in the stems that have been studied for anti-inflammatory activity, comparable to some pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory agents in laboratory research work, through COX-2 inhibition, the same pathway targeted by common over-the-counter pain medications. The betaceanins are concentrated in the red stems, the part most people discard when they consider eating purslane at all. The piece everyone throws away is where the active compound concentrates. This pattern, the discarded part carrying the most value, appears with enough consistency across medicinal plants to constitute a principle rather than a coincidence. One note: purslane contains oxalates, so those prone to kidney stones should enjoy it in moderation rather than in large daily quantities. The same moderation that applies to spinach and several other greens on this list. The preparation that produced the omega-3 levels Simopoulos spent a career trying to explain is not complicated. Fresh purslane, olive oil, lemon, salt. That is it. The Greek preparation used by the islanders in the 1992 study, eaten raw to preserve the heat-sensitive fatty acids, dressed with olive oil to facilitate their absorption. If you have a garden, purslane is almost certainly growing in it right now. The decision you make about that plant, whether to pull it or eat it, is the same decision those Greek islanders made, except they never thought of it as a decision. For them, it was simply food. The question Simopoulos' research actually raised, the one that has never been adequately answered, is not about purslane specifically. It is about the category of knowledge it represents. How many other plants that we have reclassified as weeds, as problems to be solved, as the enemy of a tidy garden, were once eaten by people whose bodies showed it in their health markers decades later? How much of what we spend money trying to eliminate was once, and may still be, what our bodies were designed to receive? A final thought worth carrying. There is one principle that runs through every plant on this list, and it is the one most people miss. The omega-3 inches, these plants, the ALA, the trace EPA and DHA in purslane. The compounds in galansoga and violet and cleavers are not stable under industrial processing conditions. They are degraded by high heat. They are damaged by oxidation when leaves are dried at industrial temperatures. They are reduced significantly when plants are processed into powders and supplements and shelf-stable products that have to survive distribution chains and warehouse storage. The traditional preparations across every culture on this list converge on the same principle: raw when possible, briefly cooked when necessary, cold steeped when the compounds are heat sensitive, consumed as close to harvest as the preparation allows. Not because these cultures had nutrition labels, because they had results. Generations of observation told them that the preparation mattered, that the same plant prepared differently produced different outcomes. They were right. And the biochemistry now explains why. What industrial food processing did, across the 20th century, was optimized for everything except the fragile, heat-sensitive, easily oxidized compounds that made traditional foods pharmacologically active. We refined, heated, preserved, shelf-stabilized, and standardized our food supply, and then wondered why the chronic disease rates in populations eating traditional diets looked so different from our own. The plants on this list are not health foods. They are not supplements. They are food specifically. The category of food that industrial processing cannot meaningfully replicate because the active compounds require the plant to be alive, or recently alive, and consumed in a form close to what it was when it was growing. That leaves a question worth thinking about after this video ends. If the most valuable compounds in food are precisely the ones that industrial processing destroys, what does that tell us about where to find them? Like this video, if it opens something you hadn't considered before, subscribe. Because the history of what we used to know about food and decided to forget is a much longer story than any single video can hold. Share it with someone who tends a garden and doesn't know what they're growing. And leave a comment: what plant from this list are you going to try first? Or tell us what you'd like us to look at next. The garden has always been trying to feed you. It hasn't stopped.